So welcome to Active Travel Cafe, and we'll start this week's session with our usual crowdsourced update, and there's lots to talk about after last week's elections. And I'm delighted that our main speaker tonight, who we'll be hearing from later, is Jason Prince, who's the director of the Urban Transport Group, which is the industry body that represents all the city region transport authorities. And he'll be sharing a kind of the UTG's view on where things are at with public transport and active travel. So that's what we'll do tonight. And I will now just move that out of the way and welcome anyone who'd like to kick us off with any news updates. Have we got any newly elected councillors on the call, for instance? I know a couple may have stood. I can't see any hands up. I'm having trouble actually seeing the hands up, Adam, so I don't know if you can help me.
H was first.
Okay. H.
Myself.
Yeah, I just wondered, anybody caught up with a couple of things. First of all, was on today, yesterday and this morning, they were covering the Kim Briggs case and saying, oh, 7 people have been killed by cyclists in the past so many years. And I don't know how that's gone down. I don't think any cycling people responded to it. But it would be interesting to know how many of those 7 deaths were due to delivery cyclists and such, like riding illegal mopeds, which the public at large and the media seem to relate to being electric bikes. We've got a big problem with them in Glasgow. And also there's a story from Birmingham, the sentencing of a delivery driver who killed a 2-year-old. Her father's a clinical a surgeon, and he was with her. Her father tried to resuscitate her, but the delivery driver carried on and delivered the meal, then came back to the scene. The delivery driver's gone down for 6 years, but nothing at all about the company that was employing him. And I'm highlighting the Domino's Pizza case, where they got bounced for nearly $80 million in 1993.
Thanks, H. Good to hear those 2 news items. We're trying to keep
those delivery people under control.
Yeah,
and I need to get some data.
Thank you. Yeah, I did hear the item on the Today programme, which was a bit one-sided, I thought. Leo.
I just wanted to make the point that, of course, you know, the ULEZ was the dog that didn't bark. And in the London mayoral elections, I added up all the anti-ULEZ candidates' votes, and they were still less than 100,000 less than just Sadiq got all on his own, without considering Green and Lib Dem or Animal Welfare Party votes, right? So those of you who've heard me go on about the Goodwin curve in the past, it's like absolutely validation of that. And the Uxbridge by-election is now a thing of the distant past. So I just thought it was worth just noting that. Meanwhile, Oxford did elect a handful of anti-low traffic neighbourhood council candidates. I'm sure there's people from Oxford on the call who could say more, but they're still at the bottom of the Goodwin curve. You know, the measures have not been in for very long. They've got ongoing major roadworks, which have really exacerbated congestion, and they've pushed that issue to the top of the pile. So just to report back from London, it's fantastic news, and my goodness, we've avoided a Susan Hall mayoralty, which would have just been catastrophic for this agenda. And then I just also wanted to say, I came the other week to say we've been working on the school run cruncher. It is now there's a final version of the form to submit locations. So I will make sure that this goes out in the a link to this goes in the Active Travel Cafe newsletter, but I shall stick it in the chat window here as well. So that is the form for gathering submissions for roads that you want analysed. So if you think you have a road near you which experiences a lot of peak congestion that is associated with school run traffic, then go and fill out that form. And in about a year's time, we'll tell you how right you were about that assumption. So that's the whole of my update.
Thanks, Leo. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Would you just in one short sentence explain for those who might not know the Goodwin's curve, what that is?
Yeah, happily. So essentially, this comes from Professor of Transport Studies, Phil Goodwin. He did a paper in the early noughties, which looked at specifically at congestion pricing in a number of cities that had introduced it, including London. And he postulated that it always follows public attitudes towards congestion price and always follow the same pattern, which is that to begin with, there's dim awareness of there being an issue. So there's not much alignment around it. And then you get to a first peak where everyone's agreed there's a problem and something needs to be done about it. In this case, too much traffic. But then as soon as you announce any details about what you plan to do about there being too much traffic, public support for action plummets until you get to the bottom of the Goodwin curve, which is just before you implement the measures. And there's usually panic just before implementation. And then there is chaos during implementation and immediately afterwards, because there's always disruption. And that's the bottom, that's the nadir of the Goodwin curve. And that's usually when politicians lose their bottle. So when schemes get taken out before the end of the trial period, that is because it's the panic before implementation or it's the chaos during implementation. If they manage to hold their nerve through that period, then the same thing happens absolutely every time, which is that public support begins to climb again because people start to experience the benefits of the measures. So that is not just that's not just applicable to road user pricing and congestion pricing. It is Phil agrees. This is just the pattern that you find for any effective traffic reduction measure of any kind. It always goes through the same cycle. So that is the Goodwin curve, and it's unbelievably consistent. And you will find it at the city level. You know, look at what happened in Ghent. Right the way down to trying to retire a single parking space to do a parklet, you'll have the same thing. People will say, no, this is, they'll freak out and be furious about it until you've done it. And then afterwards, no one ever wants to go back. So, yes.
Thanks, Leo. You didn't know you were going to have to do that little mini presentation, but you responded to the challenge brilliantly. So thank you. It's just not everyone knows all the jargon.
No, absolutely. It's my favourite subject. Happy to be on.
Yeah. Can I go to Jill now and then we'll come to you, Adam?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right. I'm in school. I've got kids doing exams tomorrow, so they didn't go home till late just recently. Okay, so I just want to update on what we did in Stevenage for the elections. We were really pleased because we did what we said we were going to do when we did our presentation, Tian and I, and we made these questions really, really specific. And so we have got answers that won't waffle. They had to we really pinned them down. So with the election results we've got, Labour actually gained 8 seats from the Tories. There's just one Conservative councillor left in Stevenage. So that's 1 out of 39, 6 Liberals in opposition. But they all gave us really good answers. We think that they were given by one person in each case. So what we now need to do is make sure that every single councillor understands what their party had actually committed to. But of course, in order to do that, the crucial question at the end of our survey was, will you agree to meet us at ward level with ward councillors in your ward to talk about cycle issues or active travel issues? So we've basically now got to set up a meeting with every single councillor, including some brand new ones in their wards, which is going to be really good. The other thing, just quickly to mention, that came out of the presentation that Tina and I did is I genuinely don't know if I'm saying this name right. Elodie from London Cycling Campaign Women's Network and Miriam from Joyriders have organised with us to come up, and they're going to have, it's a Joyriders ride. It's a women's ride in Stevenage this Saturday coming. We've got up to 20 people coming. If there are any women here who are local to Stevenage or can get on a train to Stevenage to arrive at Stevenage Station about 10:30. I'll put the link in there because they've opened up this ride on Eventbrite to sort of people beyond just joyriders. But obviously it is, I have to emphasise, it is a women's only ride because it is being led by joyriders. I'll pop that in the link. So if anybody would like to join that, any women would like to join that, please do. And we're sort of that we'll then have a sort of a setup where we could maybe do a rides for others that can come to Stevenage to sort of see things around. We're doing a 30 kilometres on Saturday, so it's quite an extensive route, and a morning and a lunch provided by my husband. Okay, so I'll pop that in the link and hopefully maybe see people from here.
Thank you, Jill. That sounds really interesting and exciting. Adam.
Yeah, this is more following off of Leah. In London, I think the language that's being used now at a high level has changed drastically after the elections. I mean, I've got a tweet from Will Norman where he's calling the Secretary of State for Transport spouting batshit conspiracy theories that is beyond embarrassing, which I think kind of shows, I think the language has got a lot stronger, which I think is really positive. But is now it's getting to that point where they're just calling out the government for doing on this basis, and almost kind of undermining active travel investment. So, but yeah, I just thought that was a really powerful thing that we're seeing, and that's kind of like almost like a shift, a real seismic shift in the language that's being used, which I think is really important.
Thanks. Has anyone else got any other insights from their area on how the election went, and any thoughts on whether transport policy did or didn't have any effects on the outcomes? And then, it'd be good to hear from you. Also, we've got, I don't know if he's listening, but Wilf from Hayling Island has actually stood to be a councillor. So Wilf, don't know if you want to share any more about that experience.
I did.
Go ahead, Wilf.
I stood. I got in, but it's a local borough election, so we're not. I'm not a transport councillor, unfortunately. Hampshire's the god of transport in our area, and fairly remote from us, so they don't really know any exists or haven't. So really interesting. Going to be busy.
Thanks, Wilf. And is there anyone here from Oxford who could talk a bit more about what's happened there? I don't think we've got Robin this week. No, okay. Adam, you've got another point to make. Sorry, Leah.
No, that's okay. If there's no one here from Oxford, I will say a little bit more than just so people know, it's not actually something to worry about, because the councillors who have been elected on anti-low traffic neighbourhood tickets are city councillors, and they're not the Highways Authority. So they don't have any, although that's the only thing that they stood on in many cases, it was the only thing they stood on. They don't actually have any authority. And the Highways Authority, the county council, has said, no, it's going to persist with this programme of work. It's not going to be deterred. So it's not going to have any actual practical material impact. And it is also the case that Gaza has been a real issue for Labour in Oxford as well, their position on Gaza. And so they've lost a lot of vote share from that. So it's perhaps a little bit exaggerated, it looks worse than it is, essentially, what's happened in Oxford. It's still annoying, I think, for people on the City Council.
Thanks, Leo. Let's go to Leah, then Graham. I think you're still on mute, Leah. I don't know if you're... Can you hear us all right, Leah?
Sorry, yeah, we're a bit slow on muting. Hello.
There we go.
Standing up for Andy DeGon in York. So we were really pleased when our new mayor of York and North Yorkshire ended up being a Labour chap called David Gaith. He's really, basically all the candidates came and talked about cycling in the room, and he was by far the best candidate. He was very keen on making a big difference. So we're hoping that things will change in York, because, it should really be a better city for cycling, I think. So I'm with Andy on the York Cycle campaign. So I've never been in the group. That's why I've never seen my face before. So, but I thought I'd at least update you.
Brilliant, Leah. Well, thank you for doing that, and that's exactly the point of this little section. And thank you for doing that, Graham.
Yes, I do live in Oxford, but the Gaza thing certainly prompted a huge split in the Labour Party in the council elections, and that came on top of the LTN disquiet. Oxford, as many of you might know, has most of its population in the east, many of which are heavily impacted by the allegedly by the LTNs, because there's only one roundabout which has been overloaded for about 50 years for all the traffic to go to. So there's still degrees of traffic congestion, apparently proving that traffic doesn't evaporate. We can't tell, of course, if there's been a huge evaporation, but there's still a massive demand. And I suppose one of the lessons that might be learned is that not all transport planners can read plans and therefore predict the implications. The parties that got in started generating anti-elite. Well, they were kind of anti-elitist, claiming that leafy North Oxford doesn't have any LTNs and so on and so on. But of course, leafy North Oxford is a ladder system of roads rather than the more denser network in the east. There was a major working class claim that it was anti-working class LTNs, and the poorer people lived on the main roads, which are less desirable, and so on. And then a major chunk of racism slipped in that kind of held hands with the Gaza situation. And I think that might have been largely fanned by, dare I say, Asian taxi drivers who are the majority of private hire vehicles in the city. So it's a heady mix, is all I can say. Thanks.
Adam.
Yeah, I just wanted to say Bristol's going to be quite interesting to watch. 34, the Greens were 2 seats short of a majority, so they've got 34 seats. Critically within that, you have Rob Breyer, who was part of We Are Possible. There's David Wilcox, Ed Plowden, and Toby Wells. Toby Wells is very heavily involved with the Bristol cycling campaigners, as David Wilcox, and Ed Plowden is kind of Sustrans. So they've got a very strong sort of active travel group in that area, and I suspect one of them will end up being transport, which I think is going to be quite interesting to watch, given the kind of the intransigence that has been there from Labour towards, very pro car in the last 8 years. So yeah, but it'll be fascinating to watch what happens there, because I think, and that will also reflect into the WECA, sort of the combined authority for the area, as well as the actions around the city region sustainable transport settlements, which I think should be quite interesting in the next couple of years. But anyway, yeah, so it's one to watch what's happening in Bristol. Really, really exciting.
Thank you. Right, well, if there are no more news updates, then I think we will move into our speaker section. So, like I said at the start, delighted that this week we've got Jason Prince, Director of Urban Transport Group, which is an influential body. Some of you might not have heard of it, but it performs a very important role linking all the city region transport authorities and giving voice to what those city regions thinks is important. So, Jason, over to you.
Lovely, thank you. So firstly, thank you for letting me come and present. Aren't you all lucky to get me after a long bank holiday? Wow. So hopefully I can live up to provide, well, make it worthwhile anyway. Fingers crossed. So before I go on to the slides, I'll just tell you a bit about who I am, what we do, and I recognise some names on the call as well, some friendly faces. Jason Prince, Director of the Urban Transport Group. I've been in post about 9 to 10 months. And before that, I used to work at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority for about 3.5 years. Before that, I used to work at Transport for Greater Manchester. And then before that, I worked in Parliament for a Member of Parliament, both in Parliament and also in the constituency. I live in Greater Manchester. I was born on the east side of Greater Manchester, and then after moving around all over the UK and then all over the Northwest, I've now settled back again into sort of southwest Manchester in Stretford. If anyone follows football and you're Man United supporter, I am. It's quite nice to be at home or near the home of football, although we're not doing terribly well at the moment. So what I'm going to do today, and I'm happy to obviously take any questions after the presentation, I'll do a relatively short presentation on where we are in terms of public transport. If people didn't see the report, we had published a report early this year. It was around March, and it was our first of what will be an annual report on the state of public transport across predominantly our city regions. By the way, we have 14 members. We have the major city regions, including TfL, West Yorkshire, the North East, but we also have a number of associate members, and within that we have some cities as well, Nottingham, Glasgow, and we also have represent members both in Northern Ireland and Wales. So we've got quite a good coverage, and I think on Thursday, is it Tuesday? On Thursday, I'm presenting, giving evidence to the Welsh Senate on bus franchising and what that potentially can mean for Wales. So, but yeah, today I'm just going to go through a very short slide deck on where I think we are on the back of our Inside Track report. I think key thing to take away before I put the slides out is that we believe that transport is in a precarious position, to be honest. What Inside Track does is compare over a 10-year period what transport is like now in the recent years, roughly to around 10 years ago. And when you look at some of the key trends, I think there'll be nothing but will probably surprise some of the colleagues on the call. But just some of the key headlines which aren't captured in the opening of the slides is that ultimately people are making fewer trips than they were in 2013. Commuting has dramatically changed, and a really good metric for that is rail season tickets 66% lower now than before the pandemic, and that's an astonishing number. Buses have lost roughly 1 in 4 passengers, and ultimately the car is still king. So I think those are some of the key takeaways. If people haven't seen the report, and I've seen Steve very nicely put a link to our website, but I'm happy to share a link following on from this, a link to the report. But it's a data-led report, and we'll be doing this report every year so that we can monitor where we are in terms of public transport. I'll now go to the slides, and then hopefully you can all see that. I can't see you, but is that, is everyone okay with that? Just some put, yeah, so thumbs up. Wonderful. So let's see, let's try and move on. So what do we do? So our vision is for city regions, their town and areas to be green, fair, healthy and prosperous places. Importantly, how does Urban Transport Group do that? So we've got 4 planks to what we do as an organisation. The first one is that we make the case for public transport through productive policy. So since I've been in post, we've released 3 reports. If people hadn't seen that, one of the first reports since I joined was a review of the Bus Services Act 2017. Now, I worked on the original act many moons ago, and we've given some indicators which I believe have been taken up when you look at some of the footnotes of what Labour announced recently. I think there was a number of key footnotes representing what we'd put out there in the public domain around how you can potentially improve bus services across the country. So we do policy, and we've got quite a big policy pipeline coming up, and if people want to ask some questions on that, I can talk about that later. What we also then do is have a role in helping maintain a strong network. Although there are many different interest groups, which is great, and I think the pluralism in transport is fantastic. And what we try and do, because we cover all modes, is we try and bring some of those organisations together so that we can advocate for public transport, but also provide some thought leadership and some opinion pieces. And then when we do advocate for public transport, we always try and not just talk about transport per se, but what can it do to support green places? What can it do to achieve social outcomes? And then a really important and probably one of the final things we do, we have a professional network, and this is all our members are part of a professional network, and we host a series of events across a wide range of topics. We have about 15 groups. Active travel is a key part of those groups, but we have bus, we have all those different groups, and it's a good way for our professional network to get together and to share what they're doing, because everyone's in geographically in different places, but also everyone's on a different journey. But you'll be surprised, some of the challenges, irrelevant of where you are very similar, and it's how are different areas coping with to deal with some of those changes. And I think the final thing to say is we are politically neutral as an organisation, and we're based, although I live in Manchester, we're based out of Leeds, and a very small team of us. So Inside Track, what did Inside Track tell us? As I said, the number of trips overall has declined. And you can see, obviously, COVID had a huge impact on public transport overall. Roughly from 2013, there was a gentle increase in terms of the amount of trips made across all modes. And then, as you can see, COVID hit, and we now are in a recovery. But where we are as of 2022, 2023, we are still not back to pre-COVID levels. And that, some of you may be surprised, but I find that quite astonishing, particularly when you go, I'll just jump across the slide, particularly when you look at each of the modes. So as you can see, hopefully people can make this out. So as you will see, the green was cycling. So obviously during COVID, cycling made a huge impact. People got on their bikes. There was a huge increase in how people were using their cycles, etc. And as we saw new cycling infrastructure through low traffic neighbourhoods and things be established. And as you can see, the drop off in all of the modes. As we stand now, probably about a year out from when this was done, none of the modes had recovered back to pre-pandemic levels. That is across everything. And cycling actually has, up to 2022-23, cycling had actually had fallen once we moved on from the pandemic, and was still not where it was before we started the pandemic. And that, I found that quite astonishing, really. That of all the things which you'd expect may have probably kept the level, that was one thing which really struck me. So I'll just go back. Why is this happening? I think one of the key things we found in terms of commuting, there's been a big shift of how people interact with the office and people's commuting patterns. And as you can see, 2020, the bulk of people, the bulk of workers we're only doing a day remotely. Now, when you look at the pinks and the blues, you can see that there is a significant hybrid model which has settled, and I think we'd all probably accept that. I don't go into the office every day. I don't think I know anyone who probably does go into the office every day. In terms of what we do in office work, when we have to think differently about people who work in retail, and obviously people who work in manufacturing as well, who are probably a very different setup. But no, the commuting patterns have drastically changed across the UK. But this is predominantly focused on our city regions. Also, there's been a cost of living crisis, and as you can see, real pay for various reasons is significantly lagging behind nominal pay, and that is impacting how people. We believe could be having an impact in what travel choices people make. Past 18 months, we believe, has created a gap in people's incomes, particularly those also at the bottom. And all of us, and particularly those who are on the lowest incomes, have probably been hit hardest by the significant increases in inflation. So we move on, went through the travel trends. I think what is positive is there is a recovery happening, and we still say that as we're coming to summer 24. So there's still a significant period after the lifting of restrictions. And I think there's some positive signs in some of our members. I think in Greater Manchester, we're now seeing, if I'm correct, I think significant return back into the light rail system and the Metro link. And we've also seen, compared to some of the previous years, with the introduction of bus franchising, bus patronage, and TFGM, or the B network as it is now, release statistics in those franchised areas. Patronage seems to be accelerating and is further ahead than what it was under a deregulated market or the same time last year. Then, as we continue to move on, let's look at cycling. Cycling levels have continued to fluctuate over time, and there was, as we said, there was an increase during the pandemic, but it seems that increase has not maintained its level. However, there are particular pockets, and I'll come back to what happens in London on one of the last slides. So whilst the national picture is quite mixed, there has been some growth, and particularly in our city regions, there's been significant growth, you could argue, in cycling infrastructure. I went out on my bike ahead of coming here today. So I did 25 kilometres around Greater Manchester, purely because if I go on my bike, I actually usually go on the canals. I very rarely use the urban infrastructure. And what was great to see was how some of the benefits of some of the particular travel schemes, which may have felt quite contentious at the time, actually, when you're cycling on the infrastructure, I did feel safer, particularly travelling into the city and travelling down through Chorlton, through Old Trafford into the city centre. That isn't to say I think some of the infrastructure could be improved. All of a sudden, I mean, there were some parts where literally cycle lane ended and like, where do I go now? Particularly when you're coming onto a traffic the other way and thinking, which way do I go? So I think it's a learning curve, but I think overall we should see that there's been some definite improvements in cycling infrastructure in some of our city regions. Walking, something which is often underestimated. People are still walking, and walking trends followed the opposite pattern of cycling during the pandemic. Walking seemed to decline, but now is coming back. But overall, walking is hugely popular, and something which I don't think we talk about enough. And I think it's great to have the word active travel, because active travel isn't just about cycling, it's about all modes of transport, predominantly though, whether it's walking to buses or walking to the train. And ultimately we need to get people out of their cars and finding different ways to use or access public transport. Walking as a mode in itself, I think, is almost undersold, and it's good to see that this seems to be coming back as travel choices, as coming back quite strongly. And then as we summarize before I just close up, we are seeing that London is still seeing rapid growth, particularly in terms of cycling, and cycle and walking levels in Greater Manchester continue to grow. Part of that may be part of the B network. I think part of that is from the leadership, you could argue, of Chris Boardman, who was the first active travel commissioner, and now we've got Dame Sarah Story. And we're also seeing, when you look at some of the new interchanges, cycling and walking are actually embedded into these models of interchanges. Stockport interchange is a great example of how you can redesign public realm and make it accessible for all different types of transport. But we do need to do more on behavioural change. And then over the next year, as an organisation, we are looking at a report on what we can do to facilitate better active travel infrastructure, and hopefully we'll have something which we'll work on with our members, maybe to come out probably in autumn. And we're also looking to set out the importance of active travel as part of an integrated network. And I think the final thing I would say is, The one thing we always need to press, whether to government, whether to local politicians, and more broadly, is ultimately it's about the whole. It's not one mode is better than another mode. It's ultimately about how do we create good, integrated, accessible and seamless and safe public transport. Because if we are able to create an environment where people feel they can access it at a reasonable cost and feel safe on it, then that will help turn the dial and get people out of their cars. And I'm a car driver. I mean, I'm sure many on the call are. I still do use a car, but it will help get people out of their cars a little bit more and onto public transport. And that is something that we hope to do as an organisation. So I'll stop sharing. Hopefully that was covered about 15 minutes there. I think I'm on time. So happy to take any questions.
Nice one. Thank you, Jason. And yes, we have got a few in the chat. And I thought I'd pick up myself first on one point that came from something someone posted in the chat, and your slide showing the kind of change in travel patterns and the business model. So the question is along these lines, which is that one of the challenges that we've got now is that it's not just that travel numbers are down, it's that the travel patterns have changed. So a lot more travel is off peak, which brings in less income. Do you think that the transport industry has kind of fully grappled with this change, as opposed to just the raw numbers being up or down? Things like more services needed at weekends. I believe Saturdays are now weekends, and Saturdays or Sundays are now the busiest day of the week for train travel, for instance. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's something Gary put in the chat, actually.
Yeah.
It is not only have people changed their behaviours in terms of how they interact with the core working week, but they have also changed, as you said, around when they travel and how they access public transport for leisure. And I think one thing also, which we haven't touched on, is the amount of concessionary travel trips has significantly dropped as well. People who use the ENTCS card, English National Transport Concessionary Scheme, they are down. Do I think that the industry has got it? I don't think there's a silver bullet of an answer yet that's coming through. I really don't. I think there is an acknowledgement of the issue, and I think this is where I think city regions are particularly looking to find innovative ways of how can we tackle this issue. I know in Greater Manchester, again, Metrolink is now coming back strongly, and I think, don't quote me on this, I think they have looked at how they are able to accommodate, and then there's some service changes, and people are coming back to the network. I think, is it TfL are doing a different model on Fridays about trying to entice people to get onto the transport network again. So I think, honestly, I think we're still trying to figure it out. But that isn't to say, I think that's where devolution will play a big role. And something which I've not mentioned is more powers and funding going to our city regions. And I think what we will see over time is different areas thinking of different innovative ways to try and get people out of their cars and back onto public transport again. But it is recovering.
Pearl and Mark have asked a good question in the chat.
Yeah.
I don't know if either of them want to come in, but Pearl says, for instance, what about season tickets for 2 to 3 days a week, which now fits more what most people are doing, whereas the industry is still arguably sort of a bit too stuck in the old ways.
Yeah, I mean, I know some of our members, I know that you have the Clipper card now, which you can access on Metrolink. I know that you can get some variation of season tickets on National Rail. So yeah, something is happening and some areas are doing some things, but and I think I'll be surprised if you don't see some more and new ideas coming forward over the next 6 to 12 months. And I think the B network, for example, is a great example of they're really pushing how you can well, first off, they're now pushing an integrated model of transport, which who would have thought It was only in London where you can really tap and go or use Oyster. With trailblazer deals which are happening now in the West Mids and in Greater Manchester, I think opening up accessibility will allow probably that greater polarity of solutions to try and get people back on the network.
Yeah. Cameron has got a question in the chat. Cameron, I'll ask you to come in a minute. In the meantime, I'll just try and summarize a question from H, which was, I think the question is this, which is a lot of once you implement better public transport, effectively the value of the land goes up. Because of the economic benefits you get from increased retail or whatever. So I think this question is, how can the land value uplift that comes from creating better transport be fed back into creating better transport rather than perhaps just the developers or wherever it goes now? Does that make sense as a question? Do you have an answer?
Do I have an answer? We will have an answer at some point. Whether it's the right answer is very different. Land value capture is something which is discussed widely. You could argue it's been quite successful in London, but nowhere else in the UK has the density of London. And so the value of land outside of London and Greater London is not going to be the same in some of our areas. So we are doing a piece of research which we hope to publish later this year, which answers the very simple question, how do you sustainably fund public transport? And part of that research will look at all those, we'll try and look at some of the models of how you can do that, learning from what's happened in the UK, but also our international comparators as well. Susie said from Wandsworth, I think there's a lot we can learn from our friends abroad about how they approach public transport, not just in how they build it, but also how they fund it, and also how they keep it sustainable. So yeah, it's something we are looking at. There's already lots of work out there, but we're doing something which we hope will at least go some way to answer that question later this year.
Right, well, we've got a few more questions, but I'm going to ask Roger, who's got his hand up in the chat, in the screen, if he's got a question. Roger.
Yes, hi Jason, and thanks. Sorry to miss your most of your presentation. I didn't quite manage to get away from something else in time.
You were at the reception though, so you heard most of it then anyway. So that's fine.
Yes, I have a reasonable idea of who your organisation is, what you do. We've Low Traffic Future Alliance, we've been doing a bit of looking into the whole kind of local transport plan process lately. We ran a series of events that your predecessor Jonathan came and spoke at one of them, basically to brief local campaigners from around the country, whether they're cycle campaigners, air quality campaigners, bus campaigners, anyone with an interest in low traffic future, how to influence local transport plans. And obviously that was at a time that series was planned when the government was saying, local transport plans will be kind of these things that have quantifiable carbon reductions, and obviously the government since got cold feet on some of that agenda. But we have since been surveying the local authorities outside London. Most of them are still working on local transport plans and planned to consult on local transport plans later this year or early next year. So we've been thinking about how can we encourage local authorities for whom transport is a bigger deal for local politicians than for national politicians. But the ability of local politicians to really be ambitious is constrained by lack of funding from central government and all the rest of it. So we just sort of felt there's an opportunity to get local authorities, local leaders, new metro mayors and so on, to add their voices to ours in pressing government to be more ambitious, to kind of declare their own ambitious intentions, but also to side with us in pushing national government to enable them to be as ambitious as they want to be. I'm keen to have a kind of separate conversation about how to make this arrangement work in practice, but any initial thoughts while we just kind of air the general principle?
I've seen your email. We're going to get back in touch. That's probably I'm conscious of time, but yeah, seen the email, what you bobbed through. So yeah, and I think Becky's going to get back in touch with you at some point this week. That's a very short answer.
That was a short and
thank you. And if you've got,
that's great. Okay, but that's good.
you've got
Thanks.
further thoughts on that, you can always put it in the chat, Jason. So I'm going to ask a question now that sort of summarizes two points that were asked, which is actually about the UTG itself, Jason. So one point was, would you consider extending the membership of the urban transport group to larger unitaries? Because at the moment it's more just combined. And the second question, also from someone else in the chat, was, is the membership automatic? So would new combined authorities like the East Midlands automatically become a member?
Very good questions, very pertinent questions. So on the latter question, it's not automatic. However, one thing that we do as an organisation, if we do give where best we can, because of our membership, we offer transport advice to the UK mayors, and we now have a number of, well, we have East Mids Combined Authority and York and North Yorkshire, and then obviously NEMCA North East. So yeah, it's they're not automatic, but it's something we are exploring with them. So updates to follow. In terms of expanding it broader, we're having a very live conversation with within the team and with colleagues about, actually, irrelevant of whether it's a city region, there are many cities which are urban areas which are facing exactly the same challenges. And that's something we're looking at, about potentially some of those areas may be coming on as associate members. And there's quite a lot of those areas which have, I would argue, have significant density populations, but even though Urban Transport Group, like when you look at our membership of Greater Manchester, there are still towns within that who also have quite unique factors within that. So yeah, on the first one, it's not automatic, but we are exploring, and hopefully some positive news soon. Secondly, we would look to have discussions with other urban and cities who may wish to join and be part of the network, and see how we can mutually support each other.
Before I go to Leah, there are just a couple more questions about the sort of remit of the actual UTG itself. So one was, would you also consider engaging and supporting community groups inside a city region, or are you just focused on the actual transport bodies? And then the second question is, will you be at the Cycle City, Cycle County conference in Leicester in July?
So on the first one, we do actually quite actively engage with quite a few community organisations. So when we're doing our reports, and I know this not just from UTG, but from previous work as well. And I used to work in the third and campaigning sector. It's really important. So yeah, predominantly we were set up by our members to be the representative voice for transport LTAs, basically. But yeah, we would engage usually on modal stuff or around some reports that we do with organisations which may fall in the remit of the city region, because there's a lot of learning out there, and we don't know it all. Our members may not know it all, and also they engage quite closely. So yes. And if anyone wants to drop me a message after this, more than, you've got my email, so I'll just go on the website and then just drop us a message. I'm more than happy to have a chat, or get one of the team to have a chat on anything specific.
Thank you. Right, Leah, would you like to ask your question now?
Actually, that was perfect. that kind of was, I was going to ask that question. But one of the main problems is the behavioral change, in my opinion. You know, regardless of the amount of money you have or whatever you put forward, I think you've got to really try to get people on your side, whether or not that's coming from a group. I'm from a campaign group, but we work quite closely with the council, and we've got the new combined mayor in York. So, you know, we really need change. And, you know, I think there's a lot of frustration here. but it's the behavioral change I really wanted to ask you about. So is there advice you could give? I mean, because it's the first time I've been in the group, so I might be talking from, lack of knowledge about the group anyway, so any advice you can give or tips on how we could, because I'm on the road all the time talking to people, and not just about cycling. York, people walk, but the public transport's not used enough. So we just need to get people out of cars.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, there is something which I think we all need to do, irrelevant of who it is in the sector, whether we're PTAs or UTG, transport authorities. And this is something we're going to hopefully release a report on quite soon. We all need to tell the story of why public transport matters, and I think that's forgotten a bit. And I think particularly following the pandemic, and it comes back to the point you brought up earlier on, actually, is why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why should people engage with it? So one of the things we will do, hopefully late summer, we'll do this report, which then could be used, we've done a lot of work on trying to answer that question and attach it not just to it not matters because we like trains or we like bikes. It matters for a variety of social, economic reasons. So I'm sure colleagues on the call as well will have ideas and campaigns which they will lead, because there's a lot of good community campaigning done and community activism. But yeah, it's something we champion. It's something we're looking at about what we can do to work with our members to push public transport. And I think with a new MCA, a new combined authority, I think by being an MCA, they will actually, that might open up a new opportunity for them and their officers to engage as well with some of the other MCAs to do some learning. But yeah, we're doing a report and hopefully that will start to answer some of the questions of why it matters. But I think we all need to talk up public transport in the round.
Thanks, Jason. I wonder, we've still got a few minutes left, and I've got a couple more questions. But I wonder if you'd be willing to let us ask a question on your behalf, which is if anyone's got any ideas for future reports. No promises that you'll do them. No promises that you'll do them, but I'm sure you'd be interested to hear them.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you've got an idea for a report you think Urban Transport Group should do, then post it in the chat, and we'll see if it floats Jason's boat. In the meantime, Jason, your report that you are doing on the sort of funding options for public transport, there was a question posed in the chat right at the beginning about sort of Europe, and I wondered if you would speak to that. I mean, people go to sort of France and Germany and other countries and see a much better public transport systems. Is that ultimately because it is funded differently, and or not? And is it that simple, or are there different reasons?
It's really a good question. So I recently went abroad to attend a meeting for the public. Well, the meeting was UTG are a member of an organisation called UITP, and I went to one of their forums in Porto recently. And it was both operators, it was transport authorities, and it was organisations like ourselves. And what is interesting is, although sometimes it doesn't feel like we do great things in the UK, in some ways we are leading the way, and I think we should congratulate the government for some of this as well. I think we are leading. We are improving the governance to bring decision making closer to people in terms of devolution, and that's something that we should celebrate and congratulate the government for pushing forward. We also do have, when it comes to accessibility of public transport, like I was quite surprised in some of the areas that you can't pay like with a card or contactless. You actually have to buy a ticket off a machine, or you have to pay by cash. So not everything may look completely rosy abroad than it is. However, that said, there are clearly some examples of widely across the continent, and just probably wider, of how people interact with public transport. And I don't know if it's all funding. I think some of it is all mindset. Some of it may be legacy. So I can't really answer the question, but I think the thing I took away is that, and I think the most striking thing I took away from going abroad is that they are still having the same challenges as we are. And those challenges is how to get people back on their networks. And that's a challenge whether they're operators who are private operators who are delivering under franchises or concessions public transport, or whether they're municipal operators. And they're really struggling to get people to drive the buses and to actually work in the sector. And that is something irrelevant of where we are. That is one huge issue. And believe it or not, we do seem to be further ahead in terms of patronage than some of our counterparts. So in summary, there is a lot to learn, particularly around long-term and visibility and clarity of funding over long-term infrastructure, etc. But I also think there are things which we should acknowledge. There are also commonalities in issues, but we should acknowledge that in some ways, I think we are, in terms of patronage, we seem to be a bit further ahead in some areas than probably our European counterparts. And that was striking to hear when listening to them.
I don't know if this is apocryphal, but I remember once seeing a presentation where it was said that, you know, if you live in a small German town, it's sort of embedded in the local constitution how regular your bus service will be, things like that. That just seems a world away.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And when you look at some of the challenges that are happening abroad, one thing which maybe some colleagues on the call will appreciate, it's not always about building new things, it's about maintaining what we've got. And when you look at some of the challenges we have coming up as a country, we've got to, is our transport network fit for what you could call more extreme climate events, which may have been once every 50 years, may not happen now once every 5 or 10. And we really need to put money into renewing the network and maintaining it. It's not always about new. And I know in some other countries in Europe, renewals are way behind. They're really struggling on investing and getting a transport infrastructure up. So yeah, it's a difficult one, but we just need to continue to champion actually. But this stuff matters. If we can just get a person out of a car one day a week, and it's not about, I mean, the worst thing, one of the things I panic about, worry about is like, some people may think just having green cars or EVs will solve the ills. Well, we'll still have green congestion. We need to get people out of their cars and trying to use different modes of public transport, and that's something we could all support.
Right, before we finish up, we've got 2 good suggestions for future reports. Well, I think they're good. You might not. One is on the sort of scoping the national picture on the integration of active travel with public transport hubs. How are we doing? What's good? What's, you know, are there any good examples? And what's the sort of best practice? What's the picture look like? And then the second,
to be honest, just on that one, that'd be,
yeah.
If someone can follow through on that, because we might be able to incorporate a bit of that in our report, which we're going to do, we've started to do now up to summer.
Sorry, I find the chat hard to follow because they've changed this indented model, but whoever's idea that was, would you like to come in at this point? I'm afraid I can't see who you are from the way the chat works for me.
Yeah, that was my suggestion.
Oh, Andy
yes. From Leicester. And we're going through a railway station reinvention at the moment, so that's helpful. But I was recently in Stockport, and one of the things that came out on the active, the Urban Transport Group Active Travel Forum site visit, and one of the key messages that was coming out from the people involved in that development was that the increase in footfall was absolutely crucial would be crucially led by walking, cycling access to the bus station, to the rail station, and the investment plans going forward for Greater Manchester and the other metropolitan areas and other larger unitary authorities will be absolutely measured on the ability to sustain bus routes, investments, footfall. If we don't get this right, and I do think it's a massive opportunity, if we don't get it right, there's a lot riding on it. And I think there'll be a lot riding on it in the future Labour government, and they'll have their plans for investment. And we have to focus on it. And I think it's an area where Urban Transport Group is particularly important, and as ensure great leadership, and it will add to what Active Travel England can do on a national basis around walking, wheeling and cycling. But I think with Urban Transport Group, it is very much about integration and driving up that footfall of those transport hubs, and it's crucial for all of us to get into that mode of thinking.
Definitely. And you need to make sure that's in that report. Basically, we need to make sure. Because are you involved in that, Andy? By the way, so I don't want to have a side conversation, but we'll pick up separately.
Yeah.
But excellent suggestion, and I think in Greater Manchester, where I'm based, certainly we talk about active travel being the glue that links public transport together. Really high percentages. I think it's 66% of people walk to the station to catch the train. Sorry, I think that was bus. Slightly lower percentage for train. So I think it's really important that we get more visibility on what good looks like. The second suggestion, and this was from Mark Strong, whose mic wasn't working earlier. So if you can come in, Mark, do. But this was a suggestion to do something on giving us a sort of more national view on bike share schemes across the country. Jason, I don't know how that sounds. And Mark, feel free to come in if you can. If not, I can talk to that.
No. I mean, it's maybe there is a check at actually where we are on bike share schemes and things like that. Something we can take away and speak to the team on, and see how we can incorporate or do something on that. So a bit more detail on email would be really helpful, and we can see what we can do if that's helpful.
That's really helpful, I think.
Can't see if we can do anything, but it seems to be there is something about bike share. Sorry, someone's ringing me. I just need to turn this phone off. Clearly, they're not on the call. There's something around bike hire, bike share, all of those things. And opening access. So no, more than happy to have a think, because there might be stuff we've already done as well, which I can speak to the team. But yeah, bob me an email afterwards. More than happy to have a look at it. Thank
you. And I think you'll still be able to look at the chat. There's a couple more suggestions in there. Right, I'm going to, has anyone got a final question for Jason? Otherwise, we will wrap up there. I'll just give it a moment to see if anyone has. Don't forget, I can't actually follow the indented chat. So if your question hasn't been asked, stick your hand up now. I think I might have done all the questions, Jason. So thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting, and a few things to maybe follow up there. Thank you for everyone who joined the Active Travel Cafe. We're back next week, same time. And our main speaker next week is a local Green councillor from Darlington, Matthew Snedker, who's going to talk about the politics of transport and active travel and his work as a councillor. And we'll also hear from Ranty Highwoman, who does a regular spot on the good, the bad and the interesting of infrastructure, which he encounters in the course of his job. Legendary spots from Ranty Highwoman. So thanks everyone for joining. Thank you to Jason.
Thank you everyone.